So chapter 11. Again, famous story if you have grown up in the church, or really probably any religious body, you have probably heard this story. At this time, the earth was of one language. Everybody speaks the same language, which makes things very convenient. You want to get something done, no matter where you went, no matter who you went to, you could speak to that person and they would understand you, and they could speak back to you. What did God tell the people to do that they're going to mess up on here and not do? What was the instruction?
They weren't supposed to stay together. They were supposed to spread out on the earth.
He wanted them to go all over and fill the earth. That was the command. Thought question, this is completely random. Why do you think God wanted them to do that?
Well, when you live together, it's like an apple. You got a bad apple, and that's the whole bunch.
Possibly. I had no answer for this question. I just thought of it. So that's a possibility, right? If they were all in one area and things started to digress, everybody's going to go with it, right? It's kind of the idea of how God set up the church, where each church is self-ruling. That way, if a church gets some bad leadership and they go down a wrong path, it's not the whole church. That's the problem, in a sense, one of the problems with Catholicism. When you have one man calling the shots, if that one man goes astray and everybody's commanded to follow that man, the whole thing goes astray. So that's a good possibility. Again, it's my favorite answer. I don't know. I don't know why he wanted them to spread across the whole face of the earth and do what they wanted to spread out and fill the earth. But that was the directive from God. He had his reasons. Again, with things with God, it's not up to us to always understand his reasons. Sometimes he says it like you tell your kids, I'm a parent, because I said so, this is what I want you to do, you just do it.
Well, the flood, we're not told, but it doesn't sound like anybody went anywhere. They would stay right there in the area.
That's what they're going to do. We'll read the first 9 verses of the story, and that's exactly what they're going to do. They were progressing a certain direction, came to a place, a plain, and said, you know what? We're going to stay here. This is what we're going to do. So if you would, just read the first 9 verses. And the whole earth was with one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. Does anybody have a different word than slime? Tar? Asphalt? Yeah, bitumen. Those are all better translations than slime. Because you think that slime's pretty, not going to do a whole lot slimy. It's not going to do a whole lot. But it's more like tar. It was something that was made to make the stones adhere to one another. And they said, go to, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach into heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of the men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down there and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord there did confound the language of all the earth. And from thence the Lord scattered them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So just that quick reading. Anything jump out? Anything, questions or comments that anybody have in those first 9 verses?
Thought they could do anything.
They thought they could do anything. And what's even more interesting to me is not only did they think they could do anything, what did God say about that? God said he said nothing would be restrained from them.
Yeah.
If they were all one and had one sole purpose, he says nothing would be restrained from them. So there was a concern of God, if you will. Now, if they had this one thing in mind to do and it was a good thing, would that be a good thing? Yeah, right? It would be good. But the problem is they got together and they decided to do exactly the opposite of what God said to do. They weren't going about the business of filling the earth. And the key to me, what the problem with what they're doing is in verse 4. Does anybody see the phrase there in the middle of verse 4 of what the main issue is with what they're doing? They wanted to make a name for themselves. Now I bring this up over and over again, usually when I'm teaching. The three things that Satan uses to try to get to man, the three things he used to get to Eve, the three things he used to get to Adam. It doesn't have to be all three, but these are his three go-to tools. And they're mentioned in 1 John 2:16. Does anybody remember? Have I said it enough for starting to stick in your brains yet? What are the three things he uses? Lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, pride of life. So of those three, what do we got right here? Pride. They wanted to make a name for themselves. Not a name for God, not a name for being his people, but a name for themselves.
But they also knew when they did that, they said that, for make yourselves a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth.
Yeah, it was just direct defiance. God said, do this. And they're like, you know what? Let's make a name for ourselves and do by doing the exact opposite. So did God have reason to come down and mess with them a little bit and to disturb this? He could have punished them. He could have destroyed them, actually, for disobedience. But he had every reason to do what he did. Cody.
Something I never really thought about before. Maybe when God confuses the languages, he's doing them a great service. Because they're all united in building this tower, which is being built for the sake of building a name for yourself. At the end of that tower's building, someone's going to want their name on the tower. You look at every tower in the United States is named after someone. And so they would want this tower named after them. That could be a great conflict between them and could result in just a whole lot of issues further on down the line. Especially you can see how a conflict between two brothers, Jacob and Esau, has shaped history forever. And so just confusing the languages and stepping in. Yeah, ultimately they sinned against God in doing this. They had a horrible desire, but he also probably saved a great deal of conflict in the future.
True. And even if it's not to that full extent, the very fact that God had a couple of choices. And what we're trying to extract is how God deals with man, how God will deal with us. He could have come in and just punished them, right? That would have been a reasonable response. I told you to do this, and you're doing the exact opposite, so there's going to be punishment involved. He comes in and does something, to Cody's point, that probably helped them. It caused problems in the short term, but it helped them. To David's point, perhaps, if his idea is right about the fact that they were all together to do evil and breaking them up, well, one of those broken up parts of the body, if you will, is going to be the lineage of Christ. It's going to be God's chosen people. Even though they were problematic, and we had the history of that, it was how he was going to bring about salvation to the world. So, possible. Remember, you're fixing your glasses, you got something to say.
He scattered them, which is what he wanted them to do on their own. They didn't do it.
Right. He said, you're not going to do it just because I told you so. Now I'm going to put some boundaries in place or some things in place that's going to make it happen. So another thing you're going to get, God's will is going to happen, right? No matter what man devises to try to do to stop, they thought killing his son was going to stop it. God's will is going to happen regardless of what man tries to do to mess it up. Yes, Bill?
And another thing that just sticks out to me and for us to take note of is when we see the power of God again here, to be able to confound the languages, to be able to adjust, not so much what the people are thinking, but, in one instance, okay, I'm speaking English, and then next instant, I'm thinking it's something else, I can no longer understand English. It's just one of those things of the power of God, and which to me brings the respect for him and his capabilities too, and to drive that obedience, if not for the love that he's shown us, but for that also.
It's an impressive miracle. You kind of read through it and you don't really think much about it. But again, like Joel's describing, an impressive miracle. To go through and divide people with this things they had never studied, things they had never learned from their, like a baby up, but completely different languages. And then have groups that could understand it. I've seen, I don't know what movie it was, but I've seen movie representation of that where they're actually constructing this tower, and then someone comes up and they're speaking English in the movie, but someone comes up and they're speaking Spanish, or they're speaking something else, and they're like, what is wrong with you, right? But all of a sudden they're talking together and everything just separates into own groups, and there they all go, right? So again, the power of God to be able to do that, this is another example. It's impressive.
I was gonna say, what's crazy about that is, they all share the same root language, and if you look at it just semantically, they speak a semantic language, and so, but it was just tweaked enough from person to person, you had the confusion. I mean, it's just incredible still, just think about that.
Yep.
So then again, you look at the apostles, they were all Hebrew, yet they were able to speak all these different languages depending on where they were.
Yep. Same thing, right? Almost in reverse, right? To all those languages he confounded, now he's having to do a miracle similar, kind of reverse, to get his message across to all the different people. Cool.
And the other thing there, verse 7, let us, we see the plurality conversing and taking action, just as it is in Genesis 1:26-27.
Right.
Just a little window in, see the plurality there.
Right, the plurality of Godhead. So, go
I was
ahead.
gonna ask about verse 5. So would that be like the same one that's in Genesis 1:1, the Elohim?
I would imagine so, but when I saw, I didn't go look at the original language, but whenever I start seeing the phraseology of the plurality when a Godhead speaking to itself, it would be the all of Godhead there. Anything else? Great comments. Some of the things that I noticed, and again, some of the things I took out of Jerry's notes here, it's funny to me where they stopped, the land of Shinar. Does anybody remember who came from Shinar or where they stopped at just in the last chapter? You turn back, chapter 10. Yeah, Nimrod. The guy who was a mighty man, we talked about him. He was a mighty hunter, indication of hunter of men, an enslaver of men, the place where he dwelt. That's where they decided to stop and do this. Also, I thought it was unique. I got some notes of where it's at. There's a repeated phrase that the people use twice, and then God uses once. In verse 3, they say, go to, we're going to make brick. In verse 4, they say, go to, we're going to build this tower. And then in verse 7, God says, go to, let us go down and fix this situation. So there's no point there. I thought it was unique that phrase, that man used it twice to do something wrong, then God uses the same phrase to say, we're going to go fix this. To me, I thought it was interesting. Yes, sir?
Kind of getting off here just a little bit.
Go right ahead.
I don't know of any place in the scriptures that talk about the color of man as a whole. We can hear the Ethiopian, which is a black man.
Right.
With Adam and the red man. But here we see a huge number of people. Blink of an eye, languages change. Could there be change of man at that time also, of the color of the skin, or the configuration of man? Could we see different parts of the country, the Oriental, their features, or like I say, Africa with the black people majority, and we have giants in different places, but to identify yourself in a huge number of people, maybe just by language, might be difficult. Say, okay, all you people, how are we going to find everybody who speaks my language?
True.
Now, if all of a sudden in this, my features change or a whole bunch of people who speak the same language, features changed also, easy for identification, say, okay, all you people look like me, we got to go this way.
True. I mean, it's a possibility. The Bible doesn't address that like
Never
you're saying.
addresses that anyway.
Never heard it, but is it a possibility? Yeah. There's a couple of different, there's a bunch of different possibilities, right? Could God have physically changed color, complexion, facial features, body features, for people more readily identified who spoke their language. Sir?
That God can do what he wants.
He could have done it, but it's not listed. So he says languages. Another thought is, whenever people spoke the same language, as they did fill the earth and go certain places, man, the people, you look at people in northern climates, well, I guess they don't need as much, melanin in your skin in the northern climates. People that go around to the equator, guess what? You need your skin to be a little darker to survive down there well. So it could have been something that just happened that way. The way people kind of look, if you had people divided up into certain groups, guess what you do? You have a concentration of certain genetics. So if they tended to look a certain way, it would be amplified by them staying in that group. So those are all possibilities. Again, favorite answer? I don't know. I don't know. But you look at what we have now across the whole world, you have distinctive cultures, distinctive looks, distinctive languages, and you can kind of figure some of it out by different regions. Don't know.
God never put emphasis on race. He's always put an emphasis on.
Yeah, race has never mattered.
Man's the one that's put an emphasis on race.
That's exactly right. Because, man, again, what the problem with mankind is, it's physical, right? It's external. God has never been about the physical and external. It's always about the heart. You go back to, here I go with David. With Samuel, he's the one pick David. Is that right? When Samuel gets down to the family and he's looking to anoint the king, and he sees the big tall guy, he said, it's got to be him. It's got to be this guy. And God tells him, don't look on the outside. I've got someone in his family I picked. And he goes through all of them. They're not there. And they go get David, the youngest. And it's like, again, mankind would have never picked him. Even talking about Christ, mankind would have never picked him. There was nothing about him physically that was special. It's the heart. It's an inward part. Great point.
The topic today, even today, is we need to be unified, that you gotta be unified
In the right way.
way, because, there's.
Unified to do wrong is just hard to stop. And unfortunately for our country, it seems to be becoming more and more unified to do wrong. To do exactly opposite of what it should be doing, right? There's some notes from Jerry stuff. It says the confusion of tongues might be alluded to in Genesis 10:25. We talked about that, I think, last time, where it says in verse 25, for in his days the earth was divided. We talked about that possibilities of being physical continents or divided by languages, people separating up, more than likely by the languages, people separating up. It's about 100 years after the flood. Noah is still alive to see this. Noah is there. To me, that's fascinating when you think about how long people lived and the fact that he was there. It was around 1750 or so BC. There's a guy, his name's Kyle or Keel. I guess he's estimating based off population that there would have been about 30,000 people this time, so not a large group of people, but still quite a few. They were commanded to fill the earth. They did do it, so God confounds their languages. When it talks about where the direction they're going to, they're moving east from Mount Ararat, that area, and they're going towards Babylon. So they're going from modern-day Turkey towards Iraq, if that helps you at all. But again, Babylon and the Tower of Babel, going all the way back to Nimrod, has been a center and is a center of unrighteousness throughout the whole Bible. Even in Revelation, it's going to speak of Babylon in a metaphorical sense, more than likely. Again, of being the center of evil. So that happens from the very foundation of the world. Does anybody know the big word where God what this describes when God talks about himself with human characteristics? There's a big word that describes that. Because again, it says, God says, let's go down there and see what man's doing. Does that really make sense necessarily? Does God need to take a trip to go check out what man is doing? No, he doesn't do it. So when he does that, God is describing himself in human terms so we can understand that, right? And there's a big fancy word for that. This is a big bonus question. Anybody know that word? I'm hoping somebody knows it because I can't pronounce it. What is it?
Is it one of the omni?
What, ma'am?
Is it one of the omni words?
Oh.
Jefferson?
No, I'm looking at, I mean, he's all-knowing, which would apply to why God wouldn't have to go down there.
Whatever.
What'd you say, Katie?
I was thinking modification on that side.
Personification is giving something that's inanimate, human character, like a tree waving, something like that. Anthropomorphism is where God's describing himself with human traits so we can understand it. So if you ever see that big word, that's all it means. All right? Anything else? I told you it wasn't going to take very long. Again, I'm a liar. Great comment. So let's get through the genealogies. We're going to finish chapter 11. So verses 10 through 26, we're going to go through the genealogies of Seth. And I'm going to read through them. And I want you to notice something about the ages, about the people we're reading, that and I get through reading them, all the hard names. And again, Riga's working tonight, not here to do it for me. I want you to tell me something you notice about the ages, okay? Just in general, nothing specific. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and he begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 5 and 30 years and begat Selah. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Selah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. Selah lived 30 years and begat Eber. And Selah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Eber lived 4 and 30 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years and begat Reu. And Peleg lived after he begat Reu 209 years and begat sons and daughters. And Reu lived 2 and 30 years, and he begat Serug. And Reu lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters. And Serug lived 30 years and begat Nahor. And Serug lived after he begat Nahor 200 years and begat sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 9 and 20 years and begat Terah. And Nahor lived after he begat Terah 119 years and begat sons and daughters. And Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. So in that list of names and ages, what did you notice throughout that list?
Declining.
Sir?
The years are
The
declining.
years are declining, right? Everybody catch that? They start.
The earlier they married, the quicker they die.
Well, that's, I wasn't going to bring that up, but that's definitely what God is trying to get across right now. But it seems like their ages are declining, right?
And they're having their children younger too. Because, I mean, Shem was 100.
Right.
And then the next one, he's only 35.
Right.
So,
Getting married a little young, because that would make sense. If your life expectancy is compressing, you would start getting married sooner and having kids sooner, if that's what you saw, right? Typical, again, just in general. But you're right, the ages are compressing. Does anybody remember back when we were talking about Noah prior to the flood and God's pronouncement about how long he was going to deal with man? Does anybody remember that? And an age was given? 120 years, right? We talked about, was that, it reads as if God is saying, I'm only going to let man live 120 years. That's what it kind of reads like, right? But what's going on here several years later?
Started that.
Well, but what's going on? Is it 120 years? No, them guys are still knocking out 400 plus for a long time, then going down 200. So it kind of makes sense that 120 years that's mentioned back in, I wrote it down somewhere. No, it's all the way back. Yeah, it's back in 6. Come on, Chris.
6 verse 3.
Is it 6 verse 3? Yes, 6 verse 3. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, that his days shall be 120 years. Again, if you read that, at least me, I'll take that, well, he's going to cut their age down to 120. Probably it was a pronouncement of when the punishment was coming with the flood. I'm going to give him 120 years, and this is going to be over. Because here we are after the flood, and men are still living a lot longer than that. Now, could it have meant that God was going to start trimming them down to 120 years? Possibly. But it seems to fit better that that's when the flood was going to come. That's about how much time they had. That makes sense? Anybody notice anything else in all those list of names there? I don't have anything else in that list of names for us. Most of the people we don't know, don't recognize until we get down to the very end, right? And you get to the last, really, verse 26, where it says, and Terah lived 70 years and begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran.
I think it's interesting that they were around 30 years, most of them. That's just interesting.
What?
Yes.
What was about 30 years? I'm sorry.
But that it's around 30 years that they're having this, when they say the generation carried on.
Yep.
You know, this lineage. I'm
Yep.
sure there was all other kids and, you know, before and after, I'm assuming.
Possibly. Because one thing we don't know is when they start spit out names is, was it the first child? Sometimes it is, like we see in genealogy given, but sometimes the person who's listed is a person of importance, right? This is a person who's going to do something or something's going to happen through them, so that's why we're going to name them. Yes, sir?
In the 30 years too, we don't know what is leading to that person's demise either. We just know that they lived this span of time.
Right. Okay. Let's keep on going on then. Really now it's just 27 through the end of the chapter. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran begat Lot. And Haran died before his father Terah, in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, is that, I believe how you pronounce it, who we're going to know later, of course, is Sarah. And the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren and had no child. And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son, Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of the Canaanites. And they came into Haran as a country, not as a person, and dwelt there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. What is unusual? I didn't pick this up. I never had picked this up until this last reading about who they married that we would find unusual. Who did he marry? Not Abram. Who did the other guy marry? His niece. Unusual stuff. I wouldn't want to marry any of my nieces. It would be frowned upon. And there's other reasons too, but it would be frowned upon. But again, things they did back then were a little bit different, right? That was something that probably wasn't frowned on. It was they kept things kind of in the family sometimes, so to speak. But again, unusual. And it also could have been the biblical principle where it didn't apply to their children usually. But what do we know about people who were married under God's law? When it's like your brother was married to somebody else and the brother died, what was the other brother's responsibility to do? To marry your sister-in-law. You know, nightmare, but marry your sister-in-law and raise up kids. That was your responsibility. Again, because the genealogies were important, right? So, again, this unusual stuff right there. What is left out of when they begin to travel here with Terah and Abram? What is one of the things that's left out of why they're traveling that we know from later on in the Bible? No, it wasn't a drought. God told them. God commanded them, get out of your home country and go to a land I'm going to show you, not knowing where you're going, right? This is what's going on here. We're going to see that in 12, and then we're going to see it's going to be recounted. Even before Simon gets stoned, and he launches into that long story talking about Judaism, he starts here. Abraham was called out of his country. That's where he starts the story. So this is all the history that we're getting ready to see. I did look at some things to me that I'd never thought of before. I had a note in here that this journey, we read about, he got called out of Ur of the Chaldees going to here. It was like 1,000 miles. So I went and looked at some maps, and people have actually done this kind of trace Abraham's journey. It was a long ways. To go from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran, and again, you think about, why do you think that place was named Haran, if you had to guess? had a son that died, right? He named the place that he went after his son that passed away, more than likely. That's a 600-mile jaunt up the Euphrates River, going away from the land of Canaan. They go that way, and they stay there for a while, and we don't know that's where Terah dies. But then they got to drop down, going southwest from there, 400-something miles to get to the northern part of what was going to be the land of Canaan. Well, then he goes down all the way in different trips, all the way down what we know is like modern-day Israel, cuts across, goes to Egypt. The amount of distance they covered before he comes back and settles where he's going to settle is like 7,500 miles.
That's because he had to live so long.
There's no doubt, right? I would have died early on. It's my choice, man. This is rough going. But you think about it, and how did he travel? Foot. By animal. There's a beat down through the desert. Have you ever seen over there? That's not good times over there. That's rough country. So again, just think about, to me, that adds to, God said, I want you to go somewhere. Now he's established, he's a wealthy man, living in a coastal town over there, and God says, go, and I'm going to tell you where. And he goes. It's incredible. Incredible faith of Abraham, and rightfully so. Yes, sir.
What's like also neat about his journey is when you read it in scripture that it's him and his household. This household consists of hundreds of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just you and the family. It's like a wagon of 5 traveling, and you have to worry about feeding 5 people each day. It's feeding hundreds.
Yeah, because you think about whenever him and Lot were together, I think the comment is made that the earth could not bear them. So that 2 groups, and this is later on their trip, right, when they become more and more wealthy, but Abraham and Lot said, we got to separate. Because our employees, if you will, are fighting over grazing areas and water. We've got to separate. We're brethren. We're not gonna fight, right? So again, it's not just a small group. It is a lot. Another thing that's fascinating, and JT will get to this next week, and I don't know if he'll bring this out, but you know what Abraham did with Sarah when he went to different countries? What was Abraham's big concern? Because she was pretty, right? Do you know how old she was when he was concerned about how beautiful she was? She was like, he was 75 when they first started going, so she was 65 when he was first concerned about this. And it happens again when they're much later. I was thinking to myself, that's fascinating to me, because usually, again, you don't think, like, concerned about, usually not, an 80-year-old's not concerned they're going to steal my wife because she's just, drop dead gorgeous. That's not his concern. So it's just fascinating to me when you think about how old they were, right? Oh, I know, but I mean, what's the first one? It's just to me, I guess the only reason I bring that up is we read things, and even whenever, I can't remember the names, whenever Sarah finally does become pregnant and has a child, and she runs off Absalom and Hagar and Ishmael. Wants them out, right? And Abraham doesn't want to run them up, but runs them out. And I think the terminology used again is that she cast the child under a bush because she didn't want to watch him die. You hear that terminology, and I'm thinking, he's a baby. He's 2, 3, 4. He was 13. So again, we read things. We have to be careful and always watch about what we preconceive and what it actually is. Do a little more study to look at it. And I'm not trying to get myself in trouble, so I apologize. But anyway, that's the point I was trying to get at, not anything other than that. So that is about all I have. It's 6:42. We're going to conclude our studies for tonight. We're going to, like I said, JT will do chapter 12 next week. So what we're going to do this evening, we're not going to have a Devo time like we had talked about, but we are going to have a couple of songs and a prayer. And we do have some here that didn't have a chance to partake of the Lord's Supper. Is that correct? How many do we have? Is it just Bob? So what, Doyle probably going to have a song for the Lord's Supper. We'll allow you. Do you have a communion cup, sir? We need to get you one. We'll bring you one. And then we'll have a song or two, and then we'll have a closing. Thank y'all.